In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to create a LookDev setup and how you can create some variants to have the option to switch between ACES and sRGB, and also have the option to switch between multiple lighting setups. Before we start this one, what you have to do is you have to go to the Cave Academy website and go to the shop page. Then just scroll down until you find this one, Maya Look Development and Lighting Props. And this scene, it will contain everything you need to create a great LookDev setup. So you can go to the bottom here and just purchase and download. And this is the files that you should have in the download. So you will see that there is a whole Maya workspace that contains some scenes, and we're only interested in the alembic here and texture that should be in source images. So there's Macbeth texture maps, and then the slate and the wooden turntable. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the Solaris interface. But then what I want to do is I actually want to modify that because I don't really like this one. I always want to have the node graph in the center and then the parameters on the right. So let's just modify that. What we want to do now is we want to import the alembic that we just downloaded. So let's create a Subcreate node and let's dive inside. And when you're inside a Subcreate, you're basically in a geometry node, which means you can create any sub you want. So I'm going to create an alembic node and go to hip. Okay, I have to save first, so let's save my scene. It will be in projects, Rebelway, then Solaris Tut, and not resources. Okay, so let's name this one LookDev Scene version 1. Okay. Okay, and then let's go to hip to import the alembic, which should be in scenes. Sorry, scenes. Okay. Just be careful here because this is at Maya scale, which means it's 100 times too big. If you take a look here, it shows 625, which is the number of meters. And we want to change that, of course. So let's create a transform node and set the uniform scale to 0.01. And yeah, that's a lot more normal. Before we go any further, you can see here in the scene graph tree, this is my hierarchy, and this is the equivalent of the outliner in Maya. And basically it just lists the groups and geometries and shapes that are in my scene. And what I want to do before I go any further is I want to make sure that this is imported correctly and that this has the hierarchy I want. So first thing, let's go to the Subcreate node, and in Sub Import here in the Sub Import tab, let's check the kind authoring to nested groups and components. And this will just change the type here, the primitive type, to groups and components instead of if you set it to the default, it's all geometry in one component. And this is just a component and then transform nodes. Okay. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to give this a different hierarchy. So let's rename that to LookDev Setup -geo sorry, slash. And you can see here that it's not doing anything. For some reason, it's still keeping the hierarchy here. And this is because by default, the hierarchy is built with the pass attribute. And if I middle click here, you'll see that I have a pass attribute. And I can go to geometry spreadsheet to show you what it looks like. So basically, whenever you have a slash, sorry, it means that it's a transform node, that it's a parent. And if you look at the start here, there is a leading slash. And when there is a leading slash, it means that the pass is absolute instead of relative, which means anything I do here will be ignored. So let's fix this. And because I don't want to go over every pass, what I can do is I can create a name node and then set the attribute to pass instead. And what I want to do is I want to remove the naming, and then instead of naming, do a rename. And just put an asterisk, and this will be a wildcard. So whatever is after a leading slash will be replaced by this. And okay, and you can see that I got rid of the leading slash, which means now that I've done this, my subcreate here is adding the intended prefix, and I can set it to whatever I want. So in my case, I want to add LookDev Setup -geo and OS. The reason I want to do that, oh sorry, I will have to rename that to something. Yeah, I could even do, yeah, I'm not sure I want to actually have the $OS here, but I could probably add it here. Okay. And the reason I wanted to do that is because we're going to have some geometry. So I could actually rename that to geometry. And I also want to add some materials later on. Okay, so now one thing that is missing in this scene is a ground, and we're going to add one. Okay, so there is two ways to do that. So either you can add it here in this subcreate, or alternatively, you can just create a new subcreate or directly type grid, sorry, not ground, but grid, and it will add one for you. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. In my case, I'm just going to do it like that. So let's just make sure that you switch to nested groups and components. And then what I want to do is I want to actually copy this parameter so it will have the same pass prefix. Okay. And then I would like to modify this this hierarchy. So let's dive inside the grid node here. Let's create a name node, and let's just replace the attribute with pass instead of name. And I'm going to call this one ground. Then let's just do the same nomenclature as what we have here. So let's do ground grp, then ground geo, and let's copy this and add shape at the end here. Yeah, okay, I think that's good. And we could probably add this as part of this group. So what you can do is you can copy pass here and add it here, but let's get rid, sorry, let's make that bigger. Let's get rid of that. Okay, So now my ground is part of this group. Right, so like in any geometry, I recommend that you use an output node. This will make sure that whatever node has a render flag isn't what is outputted, but instead it will output this node. Okay, and same thing here. Let's create an output node. Yeah. And let's call this ground instead. Okay, and that's it for geometries. Now let's take a look at materials. So there is a lot of ways to create materials and assign them to the geometries, but the way we are going to do it now is through the material library node. So let's add that. And basically this is a subnetwork in which you can create materials. So in my case, I'm working with Karma and Arnold. So Karma uses the same shader as Mantra, which is the principal shader. And for Arnold, let's use an Arnold material builder. And this one is also a subnetwork that you have to dive in and create a standard surface. So let's do that. Okay. One thing that is very neat about Solaris is that you can create a collect node, and instead of assigning directly the principal shader or the Arnold material builder, what you can do is you can directly assign a collect node, and then Houdini will just determine what is the correct material to use. So if I launch Karma, it will use the principal shader, but if I launch Arnold instead, it will use the Arnold material builder here. So let's make sure you just disable the material flag here and then connect these. So I recommend that you always put the principal shader in the first input of the collect node, because this will make sure that you have some textures in OpenGL. Basically, Houdini GL will take a look at what is connected to the first input of a collect node. And let's rename that to, this will be our gray material. And then let's dive inside and build our shader. So this one will be a standard gray, right, without any specular. And this one will be the exact same, but for Karma. Sorry, up. Okay, and without any reflectivity. Okay. So this one is principal shader gray and Arnold gray. Okay. Okay, and once this is done, you should see here that you have some materials, but what I wanted to do is I want to actually have these materials part of the LookDev setup. So let's just add a prefix here. LookDev setup. Okay, and now you can see that this is part of the LookDev setup. Cool. Okay, and then let's assign that. So let's create an assign material node. And basically what you can do is just select, let's say I want to assign the ground, assign that to the ground. I just click and drag and drop here, and then assign my gray material. So now if I switch to Karma, I should see a different kind of gray for the ground. Okay, so I've skipped a bit here because I don't want to go into too much details about creating materials, but you can take a look at the scene I've created and go see for yourself. One thing that could be interesting for you is that I show here how to correctly import texture in sRGB and then use them for an assess workflow. So this is something that you could be interested in. And what I want to show you next is how to create a variant of the scene that will be good for ACES and another one that will be good for sRGB. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so basically what I have here is a node that assigns the materials that are ready for ACES and a second node that is assigning the materials that are ready for sRGB. And I want the user to be able to quickly switch between the two. And this is possible with Solaris, and it's a really handy trick. Okay, so let's create a variant, add variant to new primitive. And this will create this node. And what we want to do is just select our two nodes and add these two as a variant. And here it will ask you for a primitive path and a variant primitive, and both of them will be the same. In our case, it will be the LookDev Setup here. So let's just copy this. So right click and copy path, and then select the add variant here, Control V, and then the same for the variant path. Okay. And you'll see here that the LookDev Setup is now in green. And if I right click here, you'll see a model here that will, this is a way to set the variant. So you can see here, I can switch between assigned material ACES or sRGB. And by default, the name of the variant is set with the name of the node here. So if you want to modify it, the best way is to just create null node. So this one will be ACES, and a second null node, and this one will be sRGB. And of course here, let's rename the variant set to something else. So this will be color space. And the good thing about this is that now the user can just right click here and go to color space and choose whatever is best for his workflow. And alternatively, what you can do is create a set variant node and choose the color space you want, and you can switch between the two really quickly. In the next part, I'm going to create some variants for lighting. So you can go over to the Cave Academy shop again and download some HDRI from there. Or if you prefer, you can go to HDRI Heaven and download some HDRI from there. Okay, so let's create a dome light. Okay. And let's go to resources and lighting, HDRI, and I'll take whatever I want. So let's take this one. Okay, and I'll just drag and drop, duplicate this node and select a different HDRI. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to create a new variant. So let's create an add variant to new primitive node and select these two and add them as variants. And same as before, what we want to do is set the primitive path and the variant primitive, and we'll set them to the exact same. So LookDev Setup, and this variant set will be lighting instead. What I have to do next is create some null nodes and rename them accordingly. So this one will be HDRI diffuse, and this one will be HDRI studio lighting, or just studio. And what you could do also is create some lights and do a third one with a 3-point lighting, for example, and this one would be 3 point. Okay. Okay, and this is my 3-point lighting, so it's not the best, it's not ideal, but it is what it is. Now that we've done all of that, you will see here that if I right click on the LookDev Setup, I will have a new lighting menu, and I can switch between all of these different lighting setups. Okay, and of course for all of your lights you want to add this as a prefix, so that the lighting is part of your LookDev setup. So make sure that you add that. Okay, so the next step is exporting, and this will be done with the USD ROP node. And basically what we want to do is just output this as a file. So let's write USD /os.usd is good. So let's just rename this LookDev scene and just press save to disk. Okay, so let's create a sublayer node, and let's set this to our LookDev scene here. And you should see that if you have displayed the lighting and materials here, you should see that it should retrieve all of your materials and lighting. And I want to set 2 variants, and that is color space to access, and then lighting to, let's keep 3 point for now. And let's add a rubber toy. And let's see how it renders. Okay, and then you should be able to switch between Karma and Arnold and Houdini GL. And if I want to change the lighting, I can just right click here, lighting, and switch to HDRI diffuse, for example. And it should switch really quickly, and you will see that you have this node, the set variant node, that will let you switch again to whatever you want. So if you want the sRGB color space, you can do that. And if I want the, let's say, HDRI Studio, I can just click and it will appear. Okay, so that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.